Africa has got to be free.
Whiteness, white supremacy, the arrogance of white privilege displayed itself here today. And typical of us with victimhood mentality and the trauma we suffered as black people, we all found ourselves wanting because a white man was acting. And the first instinct was to be scared of a white man. Yes. And we reacted when the white man was long gone, because that's how we were framed. That was a white supremacy in action, and it took us aback, including you, Chair. You were looking at it like, what's happening now? And you couldn't react.
I was watching him when he was walking towards you.
Yeah, I said to him, sit down, man. And then he said, no, I'm leaving. And I didn't know what to do, and then I realized later when he's left, this guy was supposed to be stopped. Because the first instinct is to say it's a white man, I must not touch a white man. And then I realized later, no, man, politically I'm wrong. I should have stood up to that man. But that's how we're framed, Che. You ought to deal with that thing because it continues the trauma of black people. He undermined us openly. And we must act, and we must act with agents, not the way we're being advised.
When we say Africa has to be free, you're not necessarily talking about like protecting our minerals, protecting our resources, protecting our bodies, protecting our children, maybe when it comes to human trafficking and so forth and so forth. That's not what we are necessarily talking about, or that's not what we only talk about. But we are also talking about emancipating ourselves from mental slavery. In other words, freeing our minds from mental slavery. I would like to agree with Julius Malema because it's very important for us to free our minds from mental slavery because we're still suffering from trauma. And if you watch my videos, you will notice that in most of my videos, I always talk about freeing our minds from mental slavery because that's the main part when it comes to Africa has to be free. Because Africa is where it is today is because we have leaders who don't care. And if you go deep into the roots, you want to find or you want to discover the root of the problem, then you start realizing that the root of the problem is the colonial mindset. These people are still afraid of their colonial masters. I'm not instigating violence. I'm not instigating hate. I'm not saying you have to discriminate against certain people. But what I'm saying is that the reason our leaders are puppets, they are not just puppets because they are not knowledgeable. Sometimes it's because they still have this thing of being programmed by the colonial masters. We have to understand that spiritually, if something happened to your forefathers long time ago, it will also affect you. I just want to say, most of these things will always reveal themselves through our behavior. And that is why if you visit multiple companies or government institutions, the service delivery that you will get from those institutions or those companies, and if that service is served or delivered by a black person, then you'll start noticing that the service that a white person will get and the service that a black person will get will be completely different. Then you ask yourself, what is happening? Because these people, they believe that they are still or they are living in freedom. In most cases, it's because spiritually, if something happened to your forefathers, it will also affect you. That is why we have a lot of service providers, even if they are living in townships, but they would give a better service delivery in the suburbs than in the townships. In other words, for an example, if they have clients in the townships and they also have clients in the suburbs, they will treat those clients who are living in suburbs better. Because of what? Because of the race. I'm not instigating violence. I'm not instigating hate, but this is the reality of our history. That is why I always say the solution to our problems can be found in our story. If we want to be truly free, we need to challenge these things. We need to talk about these things. We need to go back, even when it comes to the police. If a black person and a white person committed the same crime, the treatment will be different, will always be different in most cases, or 99% of the times, without exaggerating. So this is the reality, because we are still manipulated to the core. Because when I grew up during those days when our grandfathers would call a white man a king. It's not like, for an example, calling your brother a king or your friend my king. It was not something like that. It was intentional that I have to call this person a king, even if they did not ask them to call them kings. But because they were manipulated to the core, they started calling them kings. So if you call me king, I cannot deny it. I cannot deny it. But I started realizing that it was because they were manipulated to the core. So that is why I always say you cannot put a black man as a leader unless that black man is emancipated from mental slavery. So the reason today we are not trustworthy, even when it comes to trustworthiness, loyalty, it's not easy to be loyal to my brother, but I will always be loyal to a white man or a white woman. Why? Because I feel like if I don't do this service accordingly, they may take actions against me. But when it comes to the black person, I'm like, okay, the black person can go to hell. That's what we often say in most cases, because we know that a black person will say, okay, it's fine. There's nothing I can do. I cannot take actions against these people. This is what is happening. So that is why even big companies, we can talk about insurance companies and banks and etc. The way they treat us is completely different. But it's fine, it's okay. I've accepted that because we are still under colonialism. But if it's done by a black person, to me, it hurts deep. It hurts deep because I'm like, this person, even though he's highly educated, even though this person has PhD, he still feels inferior. How so? By the way they behave, by the way we behave. I'm not saying you have to treat others better and not treat others good. What I'm trying to say is that you have to provide equal treatment, because the payment is the same. If I'm your client and the other person from other group is your client for the same service, in other words, the money is the same. But now, why are you treating me different? The solution to your problems can be found in your story. So I agree with Julius Malema that, in other words, they were supposed to apply certain rules. I can understand maybe if there are no rules, if maybe these people, they are allowed to leave whenever they feel like. But if you are a witness, then it means you have to comply to certain standards, to certain rules and regulations. And if you're going to stand up just like that, then it means you have disrespected all South Africans. And just because this person is a white man They have to go after him and beg him so that they can bring him back, so that they can find or get the information they are looking for. This is bad.